No. Nick's coming back. Oh, Nick went and turned the live stream on. Okay, so this is Kevin. This is Kevin and his wife Shelby and their 4 children whose names are, I texted him because I had to ask. Their names are Elias, Gavin, McKenna, and Harper. And Kevin is going to be starting on July 1st, and the transition period will be super long. Probably like I'm not going to not be coming on Wednesday for like a very long time. Wanted to give you guys an opportunity to meet him. And this is not it's not like you're not going to hear from him again until, July. We're going to work on little ways to incorporate him in little things. Kevin and I have talked a few times, super excited about what he brings to the table, and looking through his social media and stuff, he's done some really cool stuff and has some really like cool ideas and stuff, and I'm really excited to see him do his thing. That is that. We can clap. Yeah, that's good. That's exciting for him. Yes. Really excited about that. Went through a fairly long process and landed on somebody who I think will really, really do a great job. But moving on to what we're talking about tonight, question, what is your favorite season? We could go. Fall. Huh? Hanukkah. Okay. Go ahead. Spring. Yes. Go. Fall. Summer. Anybody else? Anybody else for maybe Kwanzaa? Go ahead. What'd you say? Winter? Go. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Small tiny season between winter and spring when it's just warm enough to be like perfectly amazing, but there are no bugs.
Summer in the sun, winter in the shade. Like that is actually the perfect season. Go ahead, Caleb. Summer's good. I gotta say, summer really surprises you because like you grow up taking 15 weeks off per year, and then you become an adult, and that just never happens. It's like you just keep doing the same thing most days. Anyway. My favorite season is spring. I just love spring. I love that it's finally warm outside. The thing is, I get a little frustrated because spring does this thing as you're coming out of winter where because here's the truth about winter, and there are people who like it because they have Stockholm syndrome. But the truth about winter is that it's cold. And it starts to get cold, and you get excited because you're like, oh, Christmas is coming up, right? And the decorations start coming out, and then it's Thanksgiving, and Thanksgiving's awesome. And then you go to, and it's like Christmas season, and there's lights everywhere, and maybe you go to New York City to like go check out the lights in New York City. They may do a New York trip for Christmas. I grew up in Jersey, so we used to do that all the time. People went to New York. One time, I had a couple friends who, when they got their license, they just decided to go to New York at 8 p.m. and they videotaped the whole adventure, and it was weird. But they were just walking around Central Park at 3 in the morning. It's pretty amazing they didn't die. So where was I? Oh, winter. And then Christmas happens, and then New Year's, and New Year's is fun, and then it's just cold for 3 more months. And you just keep thinking oh, I'm really excited for it to get warm, really excited to get warm. And then it gets warm for a day, and you're like, oh yeah, this is awesome. And you go outside and it's warm, and then it's cold again. And then it gets warm for 4 days, and you're like, oh man, we did it, we made it, we're gonna make it after all. And then it gets warm, and then it gets cold again. And then it gets warm one more time for 2 weeks, and then it spends another week being cold, and you're just constantly mad because the weather won't settle into anything. And you want to wear your short pants, and you just can't, right? And the thing is it's easy to get frustrated when it feels like we're just kind of waiting on something, right? Whatever it is that we're waiting on. Oh man, they're really excited for the warmth. They were like, I heard about it, and I'm going to go outside. I think they're just getting water. But no, the thing is, when we're like waiting on something, we can get frustrated. And this whole series, we've been talking about this concept of waiting, right? We've been talking about this concept of just, the first week we talked about God has a plan, but you might have to wait for it. And the second week we talked about while you're waiting, God is faithful. Remember, we talked about Paul and Silas and how while they were waiting in the prison, God was faithful to them. And last week we talked about God is listening no matter where you are. And this week we're going to close up the series because usually what happens when we're waiting is we want to give up, right? How many guys like really struggle with giving up when you try something new, right? Yeah, a couple of you guys are honest, right? Like you're like, oh, I'm going to be committed to this. Guys, for me right now, this is like exercise, right? Like I'll go into it and it's like, this is going to be different. I'm going to change my life. I'm going to have an 8-pack and like everything's going to be different from here on out. And then like I work out for like 2 weeks and I'm like, oh, it lasted longer than it's ever lasted before. And then like I don't sleep or something, like I just have a hard time getting to sleep and it's like, well, I'm tired, so I'll just take today off. And then it's like, well, I took yesterday off, so like, I'll just start fresh on Monday. You know what I mean? And it's just easy to give up on things, right? Like sometimes when we get frustrated, it's easy to give up on things. And the person we're going to talk about tonight, his name's Joseph. And you might be familiar with the story of Joseph. Maybe you watched the musical Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. I've never seen that musical, but I assume there's a character named Joseph and he has a colorful coat. Or maybe you saw the Sight and Sound play about Joseph. But the story of Joseph is an interesting one because Joseph had a hard life up until the point where he didn't anymore, right? And his story is pretty crazy. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the story of Joseph, and I need you guys to like commit with me that for the next like 10 minutes, just try your best to focus because we're going to do a lot of reading, and so we're just going to be like kind of going through the story together, and I just don't want to lose you. So hang in, and I promise we'll try to make it as fun as we can, all right? So here we go. This is the account of Jacob's family line. So Jacob is Joseph's dad, and this is what it says. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zippah, his father's wives. So his father has 2 wives and a bunch of sons. His father's, and he bought their father a bad report about them. So Joseph was snitching on his brothers. Now Israel loved Joseph. Now, Jacob's other name was Israel. It's just it's kind of like a nickname, right? Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. So he was the favorite and he's snitching because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. So this is the story we got. Joseph is the youngest. He's the favorite. How many guys, your younger sibling has it easier than you? Right? Like, yeah. Younger sibling, Christina said, I'm the younger sibling and I have it easier, right? Yeah. I was born 7 years after my sister. I'm not 100% sure my parents are aware. I'm not, like, there's no way to be sure that, like I used to take personal days in high school. I used to wake up and be like, I'm just going to stay home today. And my mom would be like, okay, well, do you have anything to do? And I'd be like, no. And that was the conversation. That was a real thing that happened. It was a good life, I'm not going to lie to you, other than all the things that were terrible about it. So Joseph is the youngest, and he's the favorite. Joseph is the youngest and he's the favorite, and Joseph has a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. This is the dream. So he tells them the dream and they hate him. And I got to tell you, Joseph does not look good in the beginning of the story. Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and yours stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. And his brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. So imagine your younger sibling who has an easier life than you, who your parents treat better, says, hey, I had a dream and it's crazy, right? Like I had a dream and my dream was that I was kind of like the king over you. And it was cool, man. Hold on, just hang to the end. And it was cool, man. Like you guys bowed down to me, and it was awesome. Like nobody is receiving that well, right? I told you guys, Joseph doesn't look good initially. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. He didn't learn to just, keep your dreams to yourself. Maybe just sleep, Joseph. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. Now again, 12 brothers, and he says 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down on the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So things are kind of tense in the Jacob household, right? Like he's telling his brothers, you're gonna like rule over me, right? Like, and it's not going well, right? And then it gets worse. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, as you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I am going to send you to them. Very well, he replied. So he said to him, Go and see if it is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me. And sent him off to the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, what are you looking for? He replied, I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks? They have moved on from here, the man answered. I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But when they saw him at a distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. So things get real street. Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we will see what comes of his dreams. So these guys were big mad. They were upset about what Joseph had said to him. When Reuben heard this, so Reuben is the oldest brother, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him, Reuben said. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and to take them back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, that's the one his dad gave him, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from the Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. So they've thrown him in a pit, and they decide to have a meal, which is pretty savage, right? Like it's like, oh, let's throw our brother in a pit, and we're just going to eat. Like they could have waited till after the meal. He would have been, it could have been easier. But the point is that he's in a pit that he can't get out of, and they see traders coming, right? So they see people that are, trading. And this is what they decide to do. Judah said to his brothers, this is another brother, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother. That's the funniest line in the whole thing so far. That's hilarious. We won't want to do anything bad to him. We just want to leave him in a pit to die. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. His brothers agreed, so that when the Midianite merchants came by, his brother pulled Joseph up out of the cistern. It's a really funny conversation to imagine. Like, Joseph, come on up. We got to sell you into slavery. What? No, just come up. No, just, His brothers pulled him out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. So Joseph is just living his life and is telling his brothers, I'm going to rule over you. And his brothers beat him up, throw him into a pit, pull him out of that pit, and sell him into slavery. And then while he's in Egypt, things actually start to get better, right? And this is what happens when he's in Egypt. Now, Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. So, even though Joseph is the youngest and was like kind of the favorite of his father, and maybe like he's made some weird choices up till now, we know that God is with Joseph based on what it says here. And he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household and entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care, with Joseph in charge. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now, so what's happening for Joseph is, you would think if you were watching this story in a movie, like if this was a movie you were watching, you would think, oh man, things are really working out for Joseph, right? Like his brothers beat him up, his brothers threw him into a pit, but things are going to turn around, and maybe he'll end up in charge after all, right? He's a high up in kind of the household of an Egyptian guy. Maybe he works himself into being kind of in authority. But what always happens in this point of the movie, right? Like something weird happens, right? Like, hold on. Something weird happens that messes up everything, right? Like, how many guys, I kind of like hate that in movies, because I'll be like invested in the character's story, and then something happens that you don't expect. Like, okay, confession time. I'm somebody who likes romantic comedies, right? Like, just like Alex, not Alex, what? Logan was my second guess. Yeah, you agreed with me. I was talking to, yeah, my bad. I was talking to your brother earlier this week, and that's how I got jammed up. No, the point is, I love those movies, and what always happens in those movies, it looks like everything's gonna work out for whoever the main couple is, and then he runs into his old girlfriend somewhere, and she tries to kiss him, but he pushes him off, but the other girl was walking by at that exact time and saw it, and is like, oh my God, right? And then it messes everything up for a couple scenes until they work everything out, right? How many guys, anybody like The Notebook, right? Anybody? A couple people, right? Saddest line of that movie is she was surprised at how fast she fell for Lon, and you're like, no! You know what I mean? You're mad because it needed to work out with Ryan Gosling, right? So that's the moment in this story. Now, Joseph was well-built and handsome, and after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, come to bed with me. This is a PG-13 story. But he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in his house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants were inside. She caught him by the cloak and said, come to bed with me. But he left the cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. So Joseph is naked, running through the streets. That's where we're at. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants and said, look, this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. She's lying. She kept his cloak beside her until her master came home, and then she told him this story. This Hebrew slave you brought to us came to me to make sport of me, but as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. When his master heard the story that his wife told him, saying, this is how your slave treated with me, he burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. So, things just kind of went bad for him, right? Things were working out, right? So let's kind of review his story. He's his father's favorite. His brothers beat him up, sell him into slavery. I'd be pretty sure my life was over at that point, right? But everything works out for him. He's in charge. God is blessing him. His life is going well. And then this happens to him. He gets accused of something that he didn't even do. So what are you guys doing in this situation? Anybody? Leon, go ahead.
I'd take her to a prison and just
Lock her up. There we go. That's a good strategy. I don't know if you'd have the authority, but it's worth a try. Go ahead.
I would just give up. What happens to me? Somebody.
You would just give up, right? Yeah. That's a pretty normal response. Anybody else? Zipporah, go.
I'd use a spoon to dig a tunnel out of the prison and just run.
There we go. So Zipporah's plan is a prison escape. There we go. She's gonna like get a poster and put it up, and then over the course of several months, I don't know if they had posters. It probably would have been like more stone. All right, go.
I would play the "That's Not True" card.
That's not true, right? You get a lawyer, get a good lawyer, and work it out. All right, go ahead.
So I would like not eat any of the food they gave me, so I could become skinny enough to slip out of the jail cell.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that would work. I've never been skinny. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, see, we all have things like what we would have done. Here's what Joseph did. Joseph's master and took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison. After he was made responsible for all that was done there, the warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. And then if we were to continue with the story, which we're not, because it does get a little long, Joseph eventually gets out of prison because the king, or the Pharaoh in Egypt, hears that he can interpret dreams. He interprets dreams for Pharaoh, and he eventually ends up in like kind of second in command to Pharaoh. And what ends up happening at the end of his story is his brothers and his father and mother come to get grain from Egypt because there's a famine in the whole land, and they actually do bow down and say, to him as like a king or like kind of a political authority, right? And so the story kind of comes full circle at the end, and everything ends up working out for Joseph. But the truth is, there's so many points in this story where I would have just totally given up. Right? And I think that's true for so many of us, right? Like there's so many points where I would have just been like, man, I'm not doing this. I'm just like, God doesn't care about me, right? Like my brothers beat me up and threw me into a pit. You know what I mean? Like that's not cool. And I don't want to deal with that. And then like when things started to work out for me, somebody accused me of something I didn't do, and I ended up back on the bottom rung. And then eventually I worked my way back up. But the point that we are to learn from Joseph's story is that when we are waiting on God, when we are waiting on God to come through, we shouldn't give up. We shouldn't give up. Instead, we should talk to God. Like we talked about prayer, right? Just talk to God about how you're feeling and don't stop, kind of regardless of what your life looks like, right? Talk to other people. Go to people. Don't be afraid to go to people and say, hey, man, I need help. This is like what your small groups are for, right? Like the reason we do small groups isn't so that you guys can get through the questions, right? Like we have the questions just to kind of help conversation happen and all that. But the point of your small groups isn't so that you can get through your questions. The point of the small groups is so that you have people to talk to about what's going on in your life. Finally, next up, remember who God is, right? The reason we sing these worship songs is so that you can remember who God is in a way that is musical and easy to remember, right? Like Rich and David were talking about the lyrics of that song, right? Like when you are going through a difficult time, it helps to remember who God is. And sometimes worship songs help, right? Like remember who you are, right? Like you are probably, that you are able to overcome your situation with the help of God, right? Like God has called you on purpose and for a purpose. And finally, choose hope. Choose to not let yourself get down. Choose to kind of remember that, that God is on your side, that God cares about you, and that God sees you. So reviewing the series real quick, we talked about Abraham and Sarah. And that reminds us that God has a plan, even we have to wait for it. Remember we talked about how they were waiting to have a baby, and eventually God gave them a baby. And then we talked about Paul and Silas, and they were in prison, and they remembered that God was faithful, and God would come through for them. And then David, we talked about how he was going through a difficult time in his life, but he continuously cried out to God, and he knew that God was listening. And then tonight, we talked about that while we're waiting, we can't give up, because God is not giving up on us. So the point we want you guys to walk away with tonight is that while you are waiting, don't give up. Like I get that things get hard in life. I get that things get challenging. I get that you go through dark times, right? Like if we sat and talked, I'd be able to tell you about all sorts of times where it felt like things were going to end badly for me, right? But the truth is that when we stay true to what God wants us to do, when we just kind of keep at it, God comes through for us. And I can tell you story after story where this happened in my life and the lives of people I've talked to. So let's pray together, and then we're going to invite the worship team back up. And we're going to sing one more song, and then we're going to call it a night. And then what I want you guys to do is, as we're singing this song, which I don't know what song it is. What song is it? Jesus Messiah. So what I want you to pay attention to as we're singing this song is there's all sorts of times in this song where it describes who God is. And what I want you to do, maybe you've never thought about worship songs like this, but ask yourself, are there parts of this song that I can remember for times when I need to remember who God is? And you know what? I'm telling you guys, if you start to think about worship this way, it changes the way kind of you live your day-to-day lives, because a little song that you sing yourself isn't just like something stuck in your head. It's something that actually changes the way you approach life. So let's stand up, we're going to pray, and then we're going to sing one more worship song. Jesus, we thank you. We thank you that you are with us. We thank you that we don't need to give up, Lord, because you see us and you know us. Lord, you are faithful to us. You hear us. Lord, and your plan comes true. Lord, we were made on purpose and for a purpose. And Lord, we believe that you see us and you know us and you care about us. And we pray that you would reveal your love to us in new ways. Lord, I pray for anybody right now who's going through a time where they just feel unknown and unseen. Maybe they just had a bad day today as far as that is concerned. They just had a day where they just felt down on themselves all day. And Lord, I pray that you would just encourage them right now. You would remind them of who you are. You would remind them of who they are. You would remind them of the fact that you see them and you love them, and that they are not alone, that the end of their story is not written. Guys, there's a song we sang this weekend that said, if I'm not dead, you're not done. And you know what? That's true for you. I know that things in high school can feel so permanent, or things in middle school can feel so permanent, and it can feel like, well, my whole life is affected, or my whole life is messed up. Here, the truth is that God is with you, and your story is not yet